Working 18-hour days, I slipped and I fell. Windows up and hit me, I had to change well. There's no way to sustain it, you'll crash and burn. Will not be able to work and no way to earn. Change well, and then you can leave. Change well, and your kids you get feed. Turn your life around for the final bell. It's now or never, you have to change well. It's now or never, you must change well. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Change Well podcast. Now, even though our podcast is named Change Well, we've been primarily focused so far on the well aspect. We have discussed what it means to be well in the mind, body, and spirit. And we also discussed the 15 well-led guidelines for organizations to achieve business success. If you want to listen to those, they're on episode 13 through 16. But today and next week's podcast, we'll focus on the word change. This week, we will look at approaches to determine the needed change. And next week, we will look at critical lessons on implementing the change once you have figured it out and how to get the desired effect. So without further ado, let's start talking about change. Now, one definition of change in the Merriam-Webster dictionary is to undergo transformation, transition, or substitution. And that's what we're going to talk about, like change orders to projects or a change in your goals. Now that we understand the definition, let's explore a little bit on the practical side. What are the types of change? First, we can discuss the entity undertaking a change. It's either an individual, a project, a program, an organization, or even a country. Next, we can discuss the change in terms of complexity, and this is our focus today. Change theory, there's a thing called change theory, categorizes change as three types: static, dynamic, or complex, which for people that like to theorize is called dynamical. Even it's kind of weird. You have dynamic, and then they say the third one is dynamical. It's also called complex. So we'll stick with complex. Now, static change is the easiest one to understand. This is when there is an explicit agreement on the change needed and near certainty on the approach of implementation. Here's an easy, simple way to think of static change. Think about a baby's diaper that needs to be changed. It's very simple. You know how to change the diaper, and you know it needs to change, so you change it. Now, dynamic changes are a lot more complex than that. And dynamic changes are those where there is agreement that a change is necessary, but maybe not on the approach. And a lot of times you can think of agile. Now, the last one, complex change, also known as dynamical change. I said I wasn't going to say it again. I'll say it one more time. It's a different ball game altogether. In this type of change, a group neither fully agrees nor is entirely sure a complex change is necessary. This type of change is very precarious and not predictable. You know, it's like navigating a stormy sea where the waves can throw you off course at any moment. You may go down this one route of change and then you say, nope, I don't need this change. Now, let's give a practical example because this sounds a little esoteric. An example of this type of change is the current push by some companies to have their employees return to work on site. Some people think it's a good idea. Some people don't want to do it. In this case, the remote work necessitated by the recent pandemic had positive and negative consequences. In many industries, there is no consensus that on-site work should be mandatory, nor is there a clear understanding of the outcomes that will materialize if the mandate is imposed? And also, what is the approach now? Now that we got rid of some of our offices, how do we come back to work? The unpredictability calls for caution and preparedness when dealing with this complex change. So with change and its types defined, what are some practical steps we can take to change well and select the right approach? Next week, we'll talk about how to implement that approach. So as we just said, When forming the right approach to enact a change, you need to consider its complexity type. In a static change, you've already agreed to the problem, and there's a strong consensus on the approach. So on that one, the best way is to use a root cause approach or an expert analysis. Think about like when a spaceship fails, a rocket fails. You know where the sensor went off. You do a root cause analysis, you determine it's the O-ring, you change out the O-ring, and you reschedule the rocket. It could be a little bit more complex, but this one, we know it's the O-ring and then we solve it. On the other hand, when you have a more dynamic change, you need to use an incremental approach. You implement small changes and then you adapt. Think about agileness. Now let's take an example, a personal example, because we also talked about there's different types of examples. This time we're going to take a personal example of a more dynamic change. And in this case, it was my weight loss journey. When I first kicked off, I wanted to lose 130 pounds by my college reunion. Well, 1 month out before the reunion, I was not there. I wasn't going to hit it. I needed to lose 40 more pounds. It was clear I still needed to lose the weight, but I was unsure of the right approach or the new timeline to reach my new target weight. Therefore, I took an incremental approach to different aspects of my weight loss journey. First, I made an incremental change to my exercise routine. Then, when it helped was insufficient, I swapped out some of my foods and kicked up the water intake until I reached an acceptable weekly weight loss goal that I thought maybe it was a little bit less than I had before, but it was good. And with this change, I estimated a new timeline to achieve the goal and tracked. And at times I had to tweak it again when I got stuck, but I made the goal. That's an agile approach to weight loss. You know all the different things. You take little increments, you take mini goals each week, and you tweak it as you go. But sometimes the change is so complex and there's tons of ambiguity. That's when you break out this thing called the CDE model. More on that in a second. When you need a whole change model to deal with complex or, again, dynamical change, and there is no agreement on what the change should be, or even if there should be a change, the best way to change well is to use the container diversity environment CDE model to determine how to organize the unpredictable situation to find the best path forward. So let's apply the CDE model to a situation many companies face right now. What changes should be made to the work environment post-pandemic? With the pandemic having abated for now, should companies return to the office to improve communication and fellowship? Or continue to work remotely for greater flexibility? Or a third way is adopt a hybrid approach. The answer is not clear, and it's different for different companies, and factions all have different viewpoints. So to solve this, first you need to look at the underpinnings of your organization, your infrastructure of your organization, to make the best change. First, what are the containers that govern work interaction in your company, and how should they be adjusted to facilitate decision making? For example, in this case, if you only have siloed meetings of teams, you may want to have an intra-team focus meeting to discern the way forward. And if we return, do we need the same number of offices? Or is hoteling with fewer offices a better approach? That's another container. Your office is a container. So if you had 3 offices and now you consolidate it to 1 because of the pandemic, do you want to go back out and buy another office to make your organization interact at a larger level so everybody can be there? Or do you want to stick with the smaller one and practice hoteling? The container is fundamental on what type of change that you want. That's just 2 examples of containers. There's many more. Second, let's look at the problem from the perspective of diversity. Diversity in this case is a little bit different than people normally think of it. Let's look at, did the remote nature of the teams lead to differing goals among the individual teams? Now do we have diverse goals going all over the place because we haven't been coordinating, we haven't been talking real time, and people are off on their own direction. In this case, instead of bringing everybody in the office, maybe you should first look at your common goals post-pandemic, have defined metrics for this, and then pass it out to everybody. This might be better than having physical proximity. On the other hand, let's look at another case. Did we have enough diversity and skills among the team to make remote work productive? Maybe we didn't have an expert on how to do work remotely, and therefore everybody suffered, so we didn't pass that skill on to everybody else. All this is a thing that needs to be considered when looking at the problem and how to make the best change. So diversity in skills, you may need to have more diverse skills, or you may need to clamp down on the diversity if the goals have diverged. In this case, it means diversity in opinion. Lastly, you need to examine team interactions. Are our interactions too loosely or tightly coupled to make a good decision? Has the organization defaulted to an email as its primary means of interaction when what they should have done, because that's a static way to interact remotely, is to prop up a Slack channel, and that would have fostered more real-time interaction rather than waiting for an email or a phone call. As you can see, the CDE model alone does not directly indicate the appropriate change. Instead, it's a method to analyze and adapt your organization's container, diversity aspects, and interactions to provide adjustments and to figure out what is the most relevant change. You must first understand your organization's infrastructure to make effective change in times of ambiguity. Using the CDE model in the above example, an organization may realize they can achieve the same benefits of in-office work with a few changes in the remote environment. Or they may not. They may decide it's better to come in, but they need to analyze it along these three aspects to see if there's things in the underlying infrastructure of their work environment that needs to change. In either case, the CDE model can help organizations to change well in ambiguous circumstances. If you're trying to transform yourself, your project, or your organization, Wellness Leadership LLC is eager to help you. And I'm going to give you one example of an offering we have that could help. It's called the Well-Led Project Assessment, or WLPA. In this assessment, we conduct a 2-week review of your project or program's current state, benchmark it against leading practices in risk management, governance, stakeholder management, employee wellness, delivery metrics, and a slew of other things. And based on this analysis, we create an assessment report with recommended project changes and timelines to drive tangible improvements. You can contact us if you want to learn more, and we'll have a link in the show notes. With the clear KPIs to track progress provided in the WLPA, it provides an approach to delivering your project or program on time, on budget, with quality, while, and this is the key thing, because our second word in Change Well, to take care and safeguard your team's well-being. It has risk factors related to employee wellness. Invest in the WLPA to enhance delivery outcomes and build a sustainable foundation for long-term success by retaining skilled resources. And until next time, change well.